My boss, the principal architect of a highly prestigious Chicago design firm, fired me on a Tuesday morning. He did not do it in the main bullpen where the junior drafters could see. He called me into his expansive, glass-walled corner office overlooking the Chicago River. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water from a crystal decanter, sat behind his massive slab marble desk, and slid a thick manila folder toward me. "Elena, we are undergoing a strategic restructuring," Adrian said. He possessed the smooth, heavily cultivated baritone of a man who spent his life convincing billionaires to part with their money. The Ether Tower project is moving from the conceptual design phase into the execution and public relations phase. Your role as lead structural engineer was invaluable during the drafting, but we need a different kind of synergy moving forward. We are letting you go. He was firing me from the building I had spent the last 2 years of my life designing. I looked at the manila folder. Inside was a termination agreement, a $20,000 severance check, and a terrifyingly comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The NDA specifically forbade me from ever claiming conceptual, structural, or architectural credit for the Ether Tower. Adrian smiled. It was a serene, predatory smile. He was stealing my masterpiece, and he was offering me $20,000 to stay quiet about it. I did not scream. I did not throw the crystal decanter at his head. I did not remind him that without my mathematical algorithms, his beautiful, twisting glass tower would snap in half under the wind shear of a typical Chicago winter. I picked up the pen, signed the NDA, and told him I wished him the best of luck with the construction phase. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. If you have ever built the foundation of an empire, only to have a charismatic fraud lock you out of the castle the moment the walls were finished, this story is for you. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. Now, let me take you back to before the corner office and the termination papers. I need to explain the invisible hierarchy of commercial architecture, because to understand the absolute, catastrophic destruction of the trap I laid, you must first understand the fundamental difference between drawing a pretty picture and actually building a skyscraper. My name is Elena. I am 34 years old. I am a senior structural engineer. In the world of high-end commercial real estate, there is a vicious divide between the architects and the engineers. Architects are the artists. They draw sweeping, impossible structures that defy gravity. They talk about capturing light, organic flow, and disrupting the skyline. Engineers are the adults in the room. We are the ones who look at their impossible glass curves and have to figure out the brutal, unforgiving mathematics required to stop the building from collapsing and killing 3,000 people. Architects get the magazine covers, engineers get the liability. 4 years ago, I was recruited by Cross & Sterling, an elite architectural firm in Chicago. The firm was run by Adrian Cross. Adrian was 45. He wore bespoke Italian suits, drove a vintage Porsche, and possessed a charismatic arrogance that mesmerized city planners and wealthy developers. He was a brilliant salesman, but he was a remarkably mediocre architect. Adrian's designs were always conceptually stunning, but structurally disastrous. Before I arrived, his firm was bleeding money because his blueprints constantly had to be heavily modified by outside engineering consultants just to pass basic municipal safety codes. The modifications ruined his aesthetics, and he blamed everyone but himself. He hired me to be his internal fixer. "Elena," Adrian told me during my interview, leaning across his marble desk, "I don't want you to just run load-bearing equations. I want you to make my visions possible. I want you to bend the math to fit the art." For the first 2 years, I did exactly that. I worked 80-hour weeks. I took Adrian's highly impractical sketches and engineered brilliant hidden structural skeletons that allowed his aesthetic visions to stand upright. He took the credit. I took the 6-figure salary. It was a mercenary arrangement, and I accepted it because I loved the challenge of the mathematics. Then came the Ether Tower. The city of Chicago announced a municipal competition for a flagship sustainable skyscraper to be built on a prime piece of riverfront real estate. The budget was $1.2 billion. The city wanted a building that was not just a commercial hub, but a global beacon of eco-architecture. It needed to be visually breathtaking, entirely carbon neutral, and capable of withstanding the punishing, aggressive wind tunnels created by the surrounding high-rises. Every major architectural firm in the world submitted a bid. Adrian was obsessed with winning. He locked himself in his office for 3 weeks and produced a concept design that was, objectively, a work of aesthetic genius. The Ether Tower was designed to be 90 stories tall, but it wasn't a standard box. It was a twisting, asymmetrical glass helix that spiraled upward, narrowing as it reached the clouds. It looked like a spire of woven water. It was beautiful. It was also completely, mathematically impossible to build using standard construction techniques. When Adrian unrolled the concept blueprints on the massive drafting table in the center of the bullpen, the senior engineers just stared at it in horrified silence. Adrian, the lead project manager said carefully, "It's a twisting, asymmetrical glass helix. The center of gravity shifts on every floor. The wind shear at 70 stories will act like a torsion wrench. If you build this using a standard steel-reinforced concrete core, the lateral sway will cause the glass facade to shatter within the first year." Adrian dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "That's why I have engineers. Figure it out. Make the math work. The city is making its decision in 8 months. I want this building, and I want it looking exactly like this." The rest of the engineering team gave up within a month. They told Adrian it couldn't be done without drastically widening the base and eliminating the aggressive twist. Modifications that would destroy the entire aesthetic value of the tower. I did not give up. I looked at the twisting glass helix, and I saw a puzzle. I love puzzles. For the next 7 months, I practically lived in the office. I drank stale coffee at 3 a.m. I ran thousands of digital stress simulations. I mapped the aerodynamic wind loads of the Chicago riverfront. I threw away standard structural engineering playbooks and started looking at aerospace schematics and the mechanics of human spinal columns. If a building is too rigid, the wind breaks it. If it is too flexible, the inhabitants get motion sickness. I needed a core that could actively absorb and redistribute kinetic energy. In the 7th month, at 4:15 a.m. on a Sunday, I finally cracked it. I designed something I called the Harmonic Core. Instead of a single, rigid concrete pillar running up the center of the building, I engineered a segmented, dynamic central spine. The core relied on a series of massive, custom-machined hydraulic mass dampeners layered between the floors. But the true genius was the algorithmic tension system. I wrote a specific mathematical formula that dictated the exact asymmetric placement of high-tensile steel cables woven through the concrete. The cables acted like ligaments. When the wind hit the twisting glass tower from the north, the cables on the south side dynamically shifted the tension, absorbing the kinetic force and redistributing it down into the bedrock. It allowed the building to twist without breaking. It was a structural masterpiece. It made Adrian's impossible aesthetic entirely, perfectly viable. I compiled the structural blueprints, the material stress analytics, and the algorithmic formulas into a massive 500-page technical dossier. I walked into Adrian's office and dropped the heavy binder onto his desk. "The Ether Tower?" I said, my voice thick with exhaustion. "It works. The wind shear is neutralized. You can keep the aesthetic exactly as you drew it." Adrian opened the binder. He didn't understand the complex mathematics of the Harmonic Core, but he understood the digital simulation summaries. He saw the green lights on the stress tests. He saw that the building would stand. He stood up, walked around his desk, and hugged me. It was a rare, overwhelming display of emotion from a man who usually treated his staff like disposable assets. "Elena, you are a genius," Adrian breathed, staring at the blueprints. "We are going to win. We are going to change the skyline." "We are," I agreed, "and I expect to be listed as the lead structural architect on the final municipal submission. I want my name on the title block." Adrian's smile tightened for a fraction of a second, a fleeting flash of annoyance that I had dared to demand public credit. But he smoothed it over instantly. "Of course, Elena. You're the backbone of this project. We're a team." He was lying. 2 months later, the final presentations to the Chicago Municipal Planning Board took place. The board consisted of city planners, billionaire investors, and the mayor's chief of staff. I sat in the second row of the auditorium. Adrian stood on the stage. He was magnificent. He deployed his bespoke suit, his vintage charm, and his booming baritone voice. He projected massive, high-definition digital renderings of the twisting glass helix onto the screen behind him. He talked about capturing light and disrupting the skyline. And then he presented the engineering. To make this vision a reality, Adrian told the breathless room of investors, I had to completely rethink the fundamental architecture of the modern skyscraper. I designed a dynamic segmented spine. I call it the Harmonic Core. He projected my blueprints onto the screen. I stared at the projection. In the bottom right corner of the blueprint, where the title block was located, the words lead structural engineer Elena Vance had been digitally scrubbed. In its place, it read, Principal Architect and Engineer Adrian Cross. He didn't just steal the credit for the aesthetic, he stole the credit for the mathematics. He presented the Harmonic Core as his own personal invention. He spoke about the high tensile cables and the hydraulic dampeners as if he had spent the last 7 months sitting in the dark running the numbers himself. The municipal board was spellbound. They didn't just see a beautiful building. They saw an architectural visionary who had apparently mastered aerospace engineering to bring his vision to life. When the presentation ended, the room erupted into a standing ovation. I did not stand. I sat in my chair, staring at my stolen blueprints on the massive screen. Cross and Sterling won the $1.2 billion contract the next morning. The architectural world exploded. Adrian was on the cover of Architectural Digest and Forbes. He was hailed as the modern Da Vinci, a man who bridged the gap between pure art and rigorous science. The firm was flooded with hundreds of millions of dollars in new commissions. I walked into the office the day after the contract was awarded. I expected Adrian to call me into his office, apologize for streamlining the presentation for the board, and offer me a massive bonus to keep me compliant. He didn't. For 3 weeks, he completely ignored me. He was too busy giving interviews, attending galas, and securing massive construction loans to begin the excavation of the riverfront site. He hired a massive team of junior drafters and project managers to begin the logistical rollout. And then, the Tuesday morning arrived. He called me into the glass-walled corner office. He slid the manila folder across the desk. He fired me. We are letting you go, Adrian had said smoothly, offering me the $20,000 severance check and the brutal non-disclosure agreement. He was firing me because my presence was a liability. I was the only person in the building who knew he was a fraud. He couldn't be the modern Da Vinci if the actual engineer was sitting in a cubicle down the hall. He needed to erase me from the firm so he could fully, permanently inhabit the lie he had sold to the city. He believed the NDA was an ironclad muzzle. The contract specifically stated that if I ever publicly claimed credit for the Harmonic Core or disparaged Adrian Cross to the media, he would sue me for intellectual property theft and breach of contract, bankrupting me for the rest of my life. I looked at the NDA. I looked at the $20,000 check, a pathetic, insulting fraction of the value I had generated. You are claiming full ownership of the structural blueprints, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The blueprints were generated on company time, using company resources, Elena, Adrian replied, leaning back in his chair, projecting absolute corporate invulnerability. They are the exclusive intellectual property of Cross and Sterling. You were merely executing my conceptual vision. The severance is generous. Sign the document. He thought he held all the cards. He thought he was a titan casting away a peasant. But Adrian Cross did not understand the blueprints. He only understood the aesthetics of the blueprints. He had stolen a highly complex, mathematically precarious machine, and he believed that because he owned the instructions on how to build it, he didn't need the mechanic anymore. I picked up the pen. I signed the non-disclosure agreement. I signed the termination paperwork. I took the $20,000 check. I wish you the best of luck with the construction phase, Adrian, I said quietly. Thank you, Elena. He smiled, profoundly relieved that I hadn't made a scene. I'm sure you'll find a great position at a smaller firm. I stood up, walked out of his office, packed my desk, and left the building. I did not go to a smaller firm. I went to my apartment, deposited the severance check, and made a pot of black coffee. Adrian believed that the harmonic core was just a structural design, a series of concrete shapes and steel cables that any competent construction firm could follow if they had the blueprints. He didn't realize that the harmonic core was not just a design, it was a trap. When I spent those 7 months sitting in the dark, designing the central spine of the ether tower, I knew exactly who I was working for. I knew Adrian was a narcissist. I knew he was highly likely to steal the credit. And because I am a risk-averse structural engineer, I built an insurance policy directly into the mathematics of the building itself. Adrian was about to break ground on a $1.2 billion skyscraper. He was going to pour hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete. He was going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars of the city's money, and he had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him at floor 45. To understand how to weaponize a skyscraper, you must first understand the fundamental difference between a blueprint and a recipe. A standard architectural blueprint is a static document. It shows you exactly where the steel goes, where the concrete is poured, and where the glass is hung. If you hand a standard blueprint to any competent construction firm, they can build the building. But the ether tower was not a standard building. It was a twisting, 90-story asymmetrical helix. The harmonic core, the segmented central spine I designed to keep the glass from shattering under the Chicago wind, relied on a highly complex, dynamic network of high-tensile steel cables. These cables were not just static supports. They were active, tensioned ligaments. To correctly install those cables, the construction crew needed to know the exact tension load required for every single segment. If the cables were too tight, the concrete core would crack under its own pressure. If they were too loose, the building would twist violently in the wind, inducing catastrophic structural failure. The tension loads were not static. Because the building twisted, the required tension changed on every single floor, dictated by a highly complex, non-linear algorithmic sequence. When I submitted the final 500-page technical dossier to Adrian, I included the exact tension specifications for floors 1 through 44. I hard-coded those numbers directly into the blueprints. They were mathematically flawless, but for floors 45 through 90, I did not provide the hard-coded numbers. Instead, I provided the raw algorithm. It looked like a standard, albeit incredibly complex, mathematical formula. To the untrained eye, and certainly to an arrogant architect like Adrian Cross, it looked like the rest of the highly technical engineering data that he fundamentally ignored. What Adrian did not know, because he never bothered to actually read the math he claimed to have invented, was that the algorithm was incomplete. I had deliberately omitted a single invisible calibration key. It was a variable specific to the aerodynamic resonance of the Chicago riverfront, a number I had spent 2 months isolating. Without that specific calibration key, the algorithm would output tension loads that were mathematically valid on paper, but physically catastrophic in reality. I didn't sabotage the building. I simply locked the top half of it inside my own head. I spent the next year completely removed from the world of commercial architecture. With the $20,000 severance check, I took a long vacation. I traveled to Italy. I drank good wine. When I returned, I started a quiet, highly lucrative consulting LLC, performing private risk assessments for boutique engineering firms. I did not watch the news, but I didn't have to. The ether tower was impossible to ignore. The groundbreaking ceremony was a media spectacle. Adrian stood on a podium overlooking the Chicago River, wearing a bespoke suit and a pristine white hard hat. The mayor was there. The billionaire investors were there. They drove golden shovels into the dirt while the cameras flashed. Adrian gave a sweeping speech about the triumph of the human will over the elements. He talked about the harmonic core as if it were a child he had birthed himself. The press drank it up. Construction began. For the first 12 months, the project was a glorious, undeniable success. The foundation was poured, the deepest, most heavily reinforced concrete footprint in the city. The central core began to rise. Floors 1 through 20 went up smoothly. The construction execution firm Adrian had hired, a massive international outfit called Apex Builders, followed my blueprints flawlessly. The high tensile cables were woven into the concrete. The hydraulic mass dampeners were installed. Floors 20 through 30 rose into the skyline. The twisting, asymmetrical shape of the building began to reveal itself. The glass facade was hung on the lower levels, catching the sunlight and reflecting the river in a breathtaking, spiraling mosaic. Adrian was living as a god. He was untouchable. He was operating heavily on the city's $1.2 billion budget, drawing massive executive fees. He fired the remaining senior engineers in his firm to consolidate his power, surrounding himself with yes-men and junior drafters who worshipped his genius. But physics does not care about your press clippings. You can lie to a municipal planning board. You can lie to a billionaire investor. You can lie to a magazine. You cannot lie to gravity. The problem began to manifest at floor 40. It started as a whisper in the structural tolerances. The lead execution engineer for Apex Builders, a grizzled veteran named David, noticed that the tension cables on the northern quadrant of the core were vibrating at a slightly irregular frequency. It wasn't a failure, but it was an anomaly. David checked the blueprints. The tension applied by the construction crew matched the algorithm exactly. He signed off on it, assuming the dynamic twist of the building was simply settling. Floors 41 through 43 were poured. The anomaly amplified. The core was beginning to drift. In a 90-story skyscraper, absolute vertical alignment is critical. A deviation of a few millimeters at the base translates to a deviation of several feet at the apex. By floor 44, the central concrete spine was drifting a full 2 inches out of alignment. The steelworkers began to complain. The massive, custom-machined steel joints that connected the core to the outer floor plates weren't fitting smoothly anymore. They had to force them, using heavy hydraulic presses to bend the steel into place. Then, they reached floor 45. Floor 45 was the mathematical equator of the ether tower. It was the point where the asymmetrical twist reached its maximum outward torsion before spiraling back inward. It was the floor that housed the primary, multi-ton hydraulic mass dampener. It was also the floor where my hard-coded tension numbers ended, and the uncalibrated algorithm began. On a freezing Tuesday morning in late November, a crane hoisted the massive hydraulic dampener into the open air of floor 45. The steelworkers guided it down onto the concrete core, preparing to bolt it into the primary tension cables. It didn't fit. The bolt patterns on the dampener were misaligned with the anchor points on the core by 4 inches. 4 inches in structural engineering is not a margin of error. It is a catastrophic, screaming red alarm. David, the lead execution engineer, rode the temporary construction elevator up to floor 45. He stood in the freezing wind, looking at the misaligned steel. He pulled out his rugged tablet. He ran the tension algorithm provided in the blueprints. He checked the math against the physical reality of the concrete. The math said the bolts should align perfectly. The physical steel was 4 inches off. If they tried to force the connection, if they cranked the tension cables tight enough to pull the core into alignment with the dampener, the concrete would instantly shear. Microfractures would web down the spine of the building, and the entire 45-story structure would become a standing death trap. David did exactly what a veteran engineer is trained to do. He pulled a red tag from his pocket. He attached it to the primary crane hook. He ordered the crew to power down the heavy machinery. He ordered the concrete trucks idling on the street below to turn around. He ordered all 400 construction workers to evacuate the upper floors. He physically, legally, and permanently halted the construction of the ether tower. The financial burn rate of a halted mega project is difficult to comprehend. When a $1.2 billion skyscraper stops building, the money doesn't just pause, it vaporizes. Equipment rentals, union labor contracts, street closure permits, and the interest on the massive commercial loans continue to accrue. Halting the ether tower cost the development consortium approximately $3 million a day. 2 hours after the red tag was pulled, David was standing in Adrian's glass-walled corner office. Adrian was absolutely livid. His face was flushed, and the pristine, curated calm of the visionary architect had completely shattered. "What do you mean you halted the site?" Adrian roared, slamming his fist onto the marble desk. "I have the mayor touring the lower levels tomorrow. You cannot red tag this project. Make the steel fit." "I cannot make the steel fit, Adrian," David said. He did not yell. He was an engineer. He spoke in the cold, unyielding language of facts. "The core has drifted. The tension loads outputted by your algorithm are fundamentally flawed. If I apply the tension your blueprints dictate, the torsion shear will crack the concrete on floor 40. The building will be compromised." "The algorithm is flawless," Adrian spat. "I designed it myself. It passed every municipal simulation." "Simulations are theoretical," David countered flatly. "I am standing on floor 45, and the anchor points are 4 inches out of true. Your algorithm is missing a load-bearing variable for the high-altitude wind shear. The math is incomplete." Adrian froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. The math is incomplete. Adrian was a fraud, but he wasn't an idiot. He possessed a sharp, survivalist instinct. In that split second, the memory of the day I handed him the 500-page technical dossier flashed through his mind. He remembered the exact wording I had used. "I expect my name on the title block." And he remembered firing me, assuming he had already extracted all my value. "Let me see the algorithm," Adrian said, his voice suddenly dropping to a hoarse whisper. David pulled up the digital blueprint on his tablet and slid it across the marble desk. Adrian stared at the complex multivariable equation governing the tension cables. He didn't understand a single symbol on the screen. It was written in a language he had spent his entire life pretending to speak. "Fix it," Adrian demanded, looking up at David, raw panic bleeding into his eyes. "You are an execution engineer. Reverse engineer the tension load and fix the variable." "I can't," David said bluntly. "This is a bespoke, proprietary algorithmic sequence. It's brilliant, frankly, but it's entirely non-standard. The variable isn't just a number. It's a cascading sequence that affects every floor from 45 to 90. If I guess the number wrong, the building collapses in the next major storm. The only person who can fix this is the person who wrote the math." David looked at Adrian closely. "You did write the math, didn't you, Adrian?" David asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Because if you did, you need to sit down right now, isolate the missing calibration key, and give me the updated sequence. Every day we sit idle, you bleed $3 million. The investors are going to want an answer by tomorrow morning." Adrian looked at the tablet. He looked at the twisting, half-finished glass tower visible through his corner office window. The ether tower was no longer a monument to his genius. It was a 45-story tombstone. I need to review my original physical notes," Adrian stammered, the sweat beading on his forehead. "I have them archived off-site. Give me 24 hours. David did not look convinced, but he was a contractor. He followed the chain of command. "You have 24 hours, Adrian. If you don't have the key by tomorrow, I am required by law to notify the Municipal Safety Board that the structural integrity of the project is compromised." David walked out of the office. Adrian was entirely alone. He did not go to an off-site archive. He locked his office door. He pulled up the personnel files on his computer. He scrolled frantically through the records until he found my termination paperwork, my NDA, and the emergency contact number I had left on file over a year ago. He stared at the number. He had spent his entire career stealing the brilliance of the people beneath him, packaging it as his own, and discarding the architects of his success. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of his own supremacy. But to save his empire, he was going to have to do the one thing a narcissist fears more than death. He was going to have to beg the person he had betrayed. At 3:15 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. I was sitting in a quiet cafe in the West Loop, drinking a flat white and reviewing a risk assessment for a client. I looked at the caller ID. I recognized the number. It was the direct line to the corner office of Cross and Sterling. I let it ring 3 times. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I felt the absolute, icy precision of the trap snapping shut. I swiped the screen and answered. "Hello, Adrian," I said. My voice was perfectly calm. "Elena," Adrian breathed into the phone. The booming baritone was gone. He sounded breathless, ragged, and terrified. Elena, thank God, listen to me. We have a situation at the site. I am no longer an employee of your firm, Adrian, I replied smoothly. And under the terms of the non-disclosure agreement you had me sign, I am legally prohibited from discussing the Ether Tower project with you or anyone else. Forget the NDA. He practically screamed into the receiver. The core is out of alignment. Floor 45 won't accept the dampener. The execution team is telling me the algorithm is missing a variable. Elena, I need the calibration key. I set my coffee cup down. I don't know what you were talking about, Adrian, I said, projecting an aura of polite confusion. You presented the Harmonic Core to the municipal board as your own personal invention. You explicitly claimed you designed the algorithms. Surely the modern Da Vinci can solve a simple tension drift. Elena, please, he begged, his voice cracking. He was completely stripped of his armor. They red-tagged the site. We are bleeding $3 million a day. The investors are calling me. The mayor's office is calling me. If I don't give them the math by tomorrow morning, they are going to audit the project. They'll find out I didn't write it. They'll pull the funding. The firm will be bankrupt. He was handing me the absolute extent of his vulnerability. He was confirming that he was standing on the very edge of the cliff. All I had to do was push. That sounds like a catastrophic structural failure, Adrian, I said quietly. How much? Adrian demanded, shifting to the only tactic he knew, throwing money at a problem. Name your price. I will wire you $500,000 right now as a consulting fee. $1 million. Just give me the calibration key. $1 million. A year ago, he had valued my silence at $20,000. Now he was offering 50 times that amount just to survive the day. But I didn't want his money. His money was tied up in a fraudulent firm. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted the skyline. I don't want your money, Adrian, I said. Then what do you want? He cried out, sheer desperation echoing through the phone line. I leaned back in my chair. I looked out the window of the cafe, toward the riverfront, where the half-finished red-tagged silhouette of the Ether Tower stood frozen against the gray Chicago sky. I want a meeting, I said softly. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. But we aren't meeting in your office, Adrian. Where? He asked frantically. We are meeting in the boardroom of the Municipal Planning Commission, I stated, my voice dropping into a cold, unbreakable register. And you are going to invite the lead investors, the execution engineer, and the mayor's chief of staff. Adrian stopped breathing. Elena, if I do that, if I bring them into a room with you, if you bring them into a room with me, I finished for him. I will provide the mathematical key that saves your $1.2 billion building. If you don't, I will hang up this phone, block your number, and watch your firm collapse into federal bankruptcy court by Friday. You have until the end of the day to send the calendar invites. I hung up the phone. I did not wait for his response. I knew he would send the invites. A cornered animal will gnaw off its own leg to escape a trap. Adrian was about to gnaw off his own legacy. The boardroom of the Chicago Municipal Planning Commission is located on the 42nd floor of a brutalist concrete building in the Loop. It is a room designed to intimidate. The table is a single 30-foot slab of polished black granite. The chairs are heavy leather. The view through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooks the very skyline that the men and women in this room control. I arrived at 8:55 a.m. on Wednesday morning. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit. I carried a single slim leather briefcase. I did not look like a junior drafter, and I certainly did not look like a woman who had been fired and bought off for $20,000. I looked like the architect of an execution. When I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with absolute, suffocating tension. The heavy hitters were all there. Sitting at the far end of the table was Marcus Sterling, the lead partner of the billionaire development consortium funding the project. Next to him was the mayor's chief of staff, a woman named Eleanor, who possessed a terrifying reputation for destroying careers that threatened municipal optics. David, the grizzled execution engineer who had pulled the red tag the day prior, sat with his arms crossed, his tablet resting on the granite in front of him. And then there was Adrian. Adrian sat at the head of the table. The bespoke suit he wore looked as though he had slept in it. The booming, charismatic aura of the visionary architect had completely evaporated. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, staring at the lever. When I walked in, all eyes turned to me. "Ah," Adrian said, his voice tight and unnaturally pitched. He stood up, desperately trying to project an air of executive control. "Everyone, thank you for coming on such short notice. This is Elena Vance. She is a former structural consultant who assisted my firm during the early drafting phases of the Ether Tower. I brought her in today to help us untangle the minor data discrepancy David identified on floor 45. A minor data discrepancy. He was still trying to spin a $1.2 billion structural failure as a clerical error. I did not sit down. I walked to the head of the table, standing directly across from Adrian. I placed my leather briefcase on the black granite. The click of the brass latches echoed sharply in the quiet room. "Let us be absolutely clear about why we are in this room," I said, my voice projecting clearly and carrying the unmistakable ring of absolute authority. "We are not here to discuss a minor data discrepancy. We are here because yesterday morning, the central core of the Ether Tower drifted 4 inches out of alignment. We are here because if you had forced the hydraulic dampener onto that core, the concrete would have shattered, and the building would have collapsed." The room went dead silent. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire investor, stopped looking at his phone and stared at me, his eyes narrowing. Eleanor, the chief of staff, leaned forward. "Adrian assured us this was a temporary calibration issue," Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "A simple mathematical fix." "It is a simple mathematical fix," I agreed smoothly, "but it is a fix that Adrian Cross cannot provide, because Adrian Cross does not understand the mathematics of the building he claimed to have invented." "Elena, that is enough," Adrian hissed, his face flushing a dark, panicked crimson. "You signed a non-disclosure agreement. You are violating the terms of your severance." "I am invalidating a fraudulent contract, Adrian," I corrected him mercilessly. I opened my briefcase. I pulled out 5 thick, professionally bound dossiers and slid them down the polished granite table, one to each member of the board. "Gentlemen, Eleanor," I said, "please open the dossiers to page 1. David, the execution engineer, was the first to open his copy. Marcus and Eleanor followed. "What you are looking at," I explained, pacing slowly down the length of the table, "is the original, unscrubbed structural blueprint for the Harmonic Core. If you look at the title block in the bottom right corner, you will see my name. Lead Structural Engineer, Elena Vance. I spent 7 months designing the dynamic, asymmetric tension system that allows the Ether Tower to withstand the wind shear of the Chicago riverfront. I wrote the algorithm." Marcus looked up from the blueprint, his gaze shifting to Adrian. "Adrian, is this true? You stood on the stage at the Municipal Planning Board and told us the Harmonic Core was your proprietary invention." Adrian swallowed hard, the sweat shining on his forehead. She was on my staff. She executed my conceptual framework. The firm owns the intellectual property. The firm owns the aesthetics. I cut in, my voice cold and surgical. But aesthetics do not hold up a 90-story skyscraper. The mathematics hold it up. And you stole my mathematics, digitally scrubbed my name from the final presentation, and then fired me 2 weeks later to ensure I could never expose you as a fraud. Eleanor, the mayor's chief of staff, folded her hands. She did not care about the office politics of an architectural firm. She cared about the city's money and the city's skyline. "Ms. Vance," Eleanor said, her tone sharp and pragmatic, "while your claims of intellectual theft are deeply concerning, they are a matter for a civil court. My immediate concern is the red tag currently sitting on a $1.2 billion municipal project. Can you fix the alignment issue on floor 45? "I don't need to fix it, Eleanor," I replied. "It isn't broken. It is simply incomplete." I turned my attention to David. The veteran engineer was looking at me with a mixture of intense scrutiny and burgeoning respect. He knew what it meant to be the person who actually did the work while the suits took the credit. "David," I said, "you ran the tension algorithm provided in the execution blueprints for the upper quadrant." "I did," David confirmed gruffly. The math outputs a uniform load distribution, but the physical anchor points are 4 inches out of true. The core has drifted. The core hasn't drifted, I corrected him. The core is twisting exactly as it is designed to. The problem is that the algorithm Adrian provided you is missing a singular critical variable, the aerodynamic resonance calibration key. Without it, the algorithm assumes a static wind load. But above floor 45, the wind shear off the lake creates a vortex shedding effect. The tension cannot be uniform. It must be staggered. I walked over to the digital whiteboard at the front of the boardroom. I picked up a stylus. Adrian fired me before the execution phase began, I said, looking directly at the panicked architect. He assumed that because he had the blueprints he didn't need the mechanic. He didn't realize that I deliberately withheld the final calibration key from the master file. I hard-coded the tension loads for the first 44 floors to ensure the foundation was perfectly stable, but I locked the top half of the building inside my own head. I turned to the whiteboard. For the next 3 minutes, the only sound in the boardroom was the sharp tapping of the stylus against the glass screen. I wrote out the complex, cascading mathematical sequence. I factored in the lake effect wind shear, the thermal expansion of the steel, and the asymmetric gravity load of the twisting glass helix. I integrated the missing calibration key into the core algorithm. When I finished, I stepped back. "Run it," I told David. David did not hesitate. He picked up his rugged tablet, rapidly punching the new, completed algorithm into his structural modeling software. The room waited in absolute, breathless silence. Adrian looked like he was about to physically collapse. He was watching his entire illusion of supremacy being dismantled equation by equation. David stared at his screen. The digital model of the ether tower rendered in real time. The red stress indicators on floor 45 instantly turned green. The tension loads redistributed perfectly across the simulated cables, pulling the digital core into flawless alignment with the hydraulic dampener. David looked up. He let out a long, low whistle. "The math is flawless," David announced, looking at Marcus and Eleanor. "If my crews apply this staggered tension sequence, the core will align perfectly. We can bolt the dampener down by noon. The building is safe." A collective, massive exhale of relief washed over the billionaires and the city official. They had been staring down the barrel of $1 billion catastrophe, and I had just handed them salvation. But salvation comes with a price. "Excellent," Marcus Sterling said, sitting back in his leather chair, his demeanor shifting instantly from panicked investor to ruthless businessman. "Ms. Vance, the consortium is deeply grateful for your, intervention. We will authorize a $200,000 consulting bonus for your time today. Pass the complete algorithmic file to David, and we can consider this matter closed." I looked at Marcus. I did not smile. "I am not a consultant, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "And I am not selling you the key to this building for a bonus. I am retaining ownership of the Harmonic Core." Marcus frowned. "Excuse me? You are currently building a skyscraper using stolen intellectual property," I stated, tapping the dossier in front of him. Adrian Cross fraudulently presented my engineering as his own, and his firm failed to secure a valid intellectual property assignment agreement before terminating my employment. The mathematics governing the ether tower belong exclusively to me. "Now wait just a minute," Marcus warned, his billionaire ego flaring. "You are not holding a municipal project hostage." "I am not holding it hostage," I countered smoothly. "I am simply dictating the terms of its completion. If you want the ether tower to reach 90 stories without snapping in half and killing 3,000 people, you will meet my demands." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Let's hear the demands, Ms. Vance." I turned to look at Adrian. He was trembling, staring at the polished granite table, completely broken. "First," I said, "the non-disclosure agreement Adrian forced me to sign is null and void. Second, I am to be immediately instated as the principal structural architect of the ether tower, with full creative and engineering control over the execution phase. My name will be the only engineering name listed on the municipal title block, the dedication plaque, and all associated press materials." I looked back at Marcus. "Third," I continued, I require a 10% structural licensing fee based on the remaining budget of the execution phase. And fourth, I paused, letting the absolute crushing weight of the moment settle over the room. Adrian Cross is to be immediately, permanently removed from this project, I declared. He will surrender his role as principal architect. He will not set foot on the construction site. He will not attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He will have absolutely zero association with the Ether Tower moving forward. You can't do that, Adrian shrieked, finally snapping out of his catatonic terror. He leaped out of his chair, pointing a shaking finger at me. I won the bid. It's my design. You are an engineer. You are just a mechanic. I am the mechanic who holds the keys to the engine, Adrian, I replied, unflinching. You drew a pretty picture. I made it real. And because you decided to fire me, your pretty picture is currently bleeding $3 million a day. I looked at Marcus Sterling and Eleanor. Those are my terms, I said. You have until 10 a.m. to draft the contracts. If you refuse, I will walk out of this room with the calibration key. David will be forced to formally condemn the Corps to the Municipal Safety Board by noon. The project will be cancelled, the consortium will lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and the city will be left with a 45-story concrete tombstone on the riverfront. I sat down in one of the heavy leather chairs, crossed my legs, and waited. The decision did not take an hour. It took less than 5 minutes. Billionaires and politicians do not care about an architect's ego. They care about avoiding disaster. They looked at Adrian, who was hyperventilating at the head of the table, and they looked at me, sitting perfectly calm, holding the mathematical salvation of their investment. Adrian, Marcus Sterling said, his voice completely devoid of pity. You are off the project. Your firm's contract is terminated for cause, citing gross misrepresentation of intellectual property and structural endangerment. You will sign the handover documents immediately, or the consortium will sue you into federal bankruptcy by the end of the week. Adrian looked at Marcus. He looked at Eleanor, who nodded in cold agreement. He looked at David, who simply turned back to his tablet. He was completely, absolutely ruined. The man who had stood on the stage and claimed to be the modern Da Vinci was stripped of his masterpiece in a span of 30 minutes. He did not say a word. He slowly sank back into his chair, the arrogant, charismatic titan reduced to nothing more than a man who had built a kingdom on a lie, only to be crushed when the truth finally demanded its due. By 11 a.m., the contracts were signed. I was officially named the principal structural architect of the Ether Tower. My licensing fee made me a multi-millionaire before lunch. I walked out of the municipal building alongside David. The freezing Chicago wind whipped off the lake, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the profound, unshakable warmth of absolute victory. So, David said, pulling up the collar of his heavy canvas jacket. Are you coming up to floor 45 to oversee the dampener installation, boss? I smiled. Let's go build a skyscraper, David. 2 years later, the Ether Tower was completed. It stands today as the crown jewel of the Chicago skyline, a twisting, asymmetrical helix of glass and steel, soaring 90 stories into the clouds. It bends flawlessly in the punishing winter winds, the harmonic core absorbing the kinetic energy exactly as my mathematics dictated. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a global event. I stood on the podium alongside the mayor and Marcus Sterling. I did not wear a hard hat. I wore a tailored suit. When the massive bronze dedication plaque was unveiled in the grand marble lobby of the tower, it did not bear the name of Adrian Cross. His name had been entirely scrubbed from the history of the building. The plaque read, "The Ether Tower. Principal Architect and Engineer, Elena Vance." Adrian's firm collapsed shortly after the boardroom meeting. Stripped of the municipal contract and exposed to the elite circles of commercial real estate as a fraud who had endangered a billion-dollar project, his reputation was annihilated. He could not secure a contract to build a suburban strip mall, let alone a skyscraper. He faded into absolute humiliating obscurity. He got exactly what he deserved. He got the empty space left behind when the foundation is pulled out from underneath you. We are often told that the world is run by the charismatic, by the people who speak the loudest, dress the sharpest, and command the spotlight. We are told that the quiet people in the background, the ones doing the grueling, complex labor, are meant to be stepping stones for the visionaries. But vision without execution is just a hallucination. Do not let the people who draw the pictures convince you that your mathematics are disposable. Do not let arrogant leaders take credit for the structural integrity you built with your own exhaustion. If they decide to steal your masterpiece and lock you out of the castle, do not panic. Do not beg them for a fraction of the credit. Simply step back, look at the beautiful, impossible tower they think they own, and quietly remove the cornerstone. Wait for the wind to blow. Wait for the cracks to show. And when they finally realize that the building is coming down, and they come crawling back to the only person who knows how to fix it, do not sell them the solution. Take the entire skyline.